Hi, everyone. My name is Sheev Davé, guest hosting for Ishmael Interactive here on the CX Pod. Our guest today is Kathleen Delaski. Kathleen, nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
So, just for our audience, in case they don't know you or want to know a little bit more about you, could you introduce yourself very briefly and sort of like a little bit about your background, the work that you've been doing recently, and what you up to nowadays?
Yeah, well, I try it. When you come to the twilight of your career, there's a lot to say, right? So to
Yeah.
condense that down to something that people would want to sit through for seconds, um, I'll just say that I spent the first like 20 years of my career in journalism, the end of which I was mostly in TV, but the end of which I was in on that front end wave because this will be, I think, germane to the conversation, the very early internet developing consumer
Yeah.
applications for the internet. I was at AOL in the early days, America
Right.
Online. If
Right.
anyone still even knows what that
I,
is, right?
I'm old enough to remember it.
Yeah,
That's for
okay,
sure,
yeah,
Kathleen.
that's
Yeah.
definitely an age test that you can use instead of a driver's license to see if people know what
Yeah.
AOL is, right? And then
Totally.
in the back half of my career, I've mostly been in education reform. I was at Sally Mae. That's also a company that no longer exists in its form when I was there.
2008. That's all we
Yeah.
remember from that
Yes.
company. Yeah.
Exactly. So but I started their foundation, and that kind of got me into education reform. And I worked at the charter school, sort of in the charter school movement, working on creating more charter schools around the country. And then in 2012, I started this nonprofit called Education Design Lab. That's the work that, I've been doing for the past, 12 years and led to my book. The crux of what the lab does is works with existing higher education, so colleges mostly,
Right.
to create more uh, alternative is one word people use, but multiple pathways to family sustainability,
Hmm.
career success, not just the degree. And colleges themselves, they started to get it back then, but they really get it now that, that the degree is only working for, some portion of Americans, less than half. And so we're leaving a lot of market opportunity as well as,
Totally.
financial health and wealth of the nation on the table if we're not offering other ways to signal to employers that you are job ready. So we've been working on that for like 12 or 13 years, and now I've stepped down from that role as CEO, and I wrote this book, and I'm on some boards, and here we are.
I know. So let's get into a little bit of more education because this is something that the reason why I reached out to you just to learn more about this education space in the age of AI. We've seen education almost an industry, the economy, the ecology of it shift dramatically in the last few years. AI is changing what skills matter, what can be automated, what is a credential, and what is it even for. So you've been someone working on this question for a very long time before it became urgent, before it's becoming front and center as we see it right here. What do you think most people are still getting wrong about education in the age of AI?
Well, that's such a great question because we've been presented with a use case, AI, coming into, now, seeping into the national narrative and, the national hysteria almost is becoming a
Yeah, totally.
hand-wringing about all the jobs it's going to take away and how it's going to mush our minds and ruin the environment. And, we could go on. Um, but I would say that what we get wrong now, I mean, we're really thinking about it now. I mean, the good news is we're on it, we're working on it.
Mhm.
But I think what we get wrong is this idea that there's this sort of binary set of skills that we need. Um, One set being the old skills, like the human skills that are going to teach us about history and critical thinking and communication, collaboration, and how to write and how to do math. That's the old stuff. And then the new stuff, which is these technical skills that I think we recognize that we have to teach students to be, agilely, always curiously moving forward. And we get that, but this idea that these are kind of two different things, um, we haven't figured out how to put that together.
Mhm.
Because I'm the thing I didn't mention that I'm doing is I'm teaching a class. I've been teaching at George Mason University in Virginia which is our Research One university, but it's large and it's sprawling and it's a lot of its students are like first in their family college to go to college, and so it's a really good laboratory, and we're trying to figure it out, like how to think about teaching teaching in this age of AI, and how for the first few years of AI's existence we were all um, sort of, it was a forbidden fruit policy, right? That
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't use it. And now we're realizing, now a lot of colleges are reversing course and saying, oh, actually, you have to use it, else you're not going to get a job.
Yeah.
And we need to facilitate that, but we don't actually know how to use it either. And so that's where we are right now. And I use the analogy of, if because I'm working with students right now, teaching a course called "How to Get Hired in the Age of AI."
Wow.
And I think they feel like they're kind of, it's like you're in a dark closet, and you know that the door is there somewhere, but you can't quite find it to get out, and
Yeah.
get out meaning to start your life, and
Right.
have a career. And they're very stressed about this, understandably,
Mhm.
as we all kind of are in some, low level doom scrolling way.
Yeah, this is something very differently than when I graduated from undergrad back in 2013, where you almost the career lines were already predefined and
Yep.
it's stuff. But now it's one of those where a career that you thought was going to be there is not there anymore. But then on the flip side, it could be an opportunity for you to
Yep.
create your own path and chart ways. And so this leads you. I'm glad that you mentioned about the design sprint class that you're teaching at George Mason, because it leads into my second question. You know, what does education need to become in the age of AI, like you said? So what do you want students to walk away from or to have figured out from that class, or at least have seriously wrestled with by the time they're done with that?
Yeah, and it kind of gets to the point I made about, right now we're thinking about these types of skill sets in a binary way. One set over here, one set over there. I'm trying to teach, and design thinking is actually a great methodology to do
Yeah.
this, to sort of weave, let's say, weave the AI usage and thought processes and agents for that matter, right? Weave in and out of what you're doing, because that's how work is going to be. I mean, that's how work is now. You're already
Yeah.
seeing it in most fields, not most fields, many fields, but it will
Hmm.
be in most fields soon.
Absolutely.
And so I think, if the takeaway that I want students to have is that, um, let's weave it together. I'll give you an example. When I taught this class a year ago, and we weren't focused on AI, then we were focused on some other, we always pick a topic. Um, when we got to the prototyping stage, that's where,
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
make prototypes to, sort of like, version
Test it out.
one, yeah, to
Yeah.
test.
Proof of
Um,
concept. Yep.
yeah, right. Concepts, right.
Hmm.
They had to do paper things. Some people built a little website if they could, um, in order to test the solution, right? Now I've assigned, in fact, this week, I've assigned them all to teach yourself to vibe code. I did it. I showed them what I did.
Wow.
Create an app, and bring the app in next week, and one guy did it, sitting there after class.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
And we used Replit, which is I think a very easy to use. And for me, it's like revolutionary, because I always, had to manage, coders who would do the thing that I wanted them to
Right.
do. And it's always so frustrating, and long, and, lots of revs. So this was so the reason I want them to make prototypes, and then when they're going to do user testing, I'm going to have them do user testing through AI, because AI will not go out and the agent
Right.
won't go out and find you, test subjects, but they can tell you what, millions of composite people think about this. But I'm going
Yeah.
to make them do both. They've got to go out and
Right.
get people and employers and students, and they've got to do it, and kind of sort of get that sense of what works in what situation, what adds value, what doesn't, what feels like you're cheating a step, and what actually sparks ideas. So that would be an
Qualitative
example.
Qualitative and quantitative,
Yeah,
both, as you said. This is really interesting because you're working with an institution right now as George Mason University, and there's often a gap between what institutions say they want, so innovation, equity, learner-centered design, things like that, and what exactly it takes to get them to change. So,
right.
what's something that you used to run into all the time that you now have figured out for the most part? Like a previous problem that you're like, okay, I think I got a handle on that now.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a hard one because it's always pretty gradual, that but I do think, and Mason's always been very open to ideas. I mean, their tagline at the university is where innovation is tradition, because
Mm,
it's a newer, scrappy university, and you see several of these around the country, and they're the ones where there's a lot of cool stuff going on, right? Because they're not living off their reputation because they didn't have one. Um,
mhm,
and so, but even in that environment, I do find that because things are changing so fast that any of the universities or colleges that I work with or we work with through the lab are much more willing to just let you try stuff out. There's not sort of as much of a logjam of approvals or reticence because they recognize that we have to fail forward. I mean, there's also a problem which has not gone away. I think that the pilot fatigue, where you're allowed to try things out and then people don't actually end things. Like there's not that closing the loop to say, okay, did that work? Are we going to keep going?
totally.
Yeah, things either fizzle out or you keep trying to do too much, and it's that kill off your young that often doesn't happen still.
I've seen that, and it can not only just be with George Mason, but any sort of even larger institution, state colleges, state universities, or just places that have been around for 100 years or
Yeah,
200 years. That the technology is changing such at a rapid rate that it's almost hard for a bureaucracy to keep up with it. And so I echo what your sentiment is of like we can do a pilot, but we got to close the loop. And this is where it goes back to design thinking, where it's
yeah,
a measurement. I mean, a DA pilot and then measure, and like you said, close the loop because it's like okay, this is something that I've encountered a lot in my life where we do research projects, we compile, we do qualitative, we do all the things that comes with human-centered design, whether that's dot voting and
right.
clustering and things like that. You bring out a nice package report, and then it just sits on the shelf right
Yeah,
afterwards, and
right.
no one does anything with it. And it is not surprising that couple of years, 3 years, 5 years later, people were like, hey, we're still encountering this problem. We should do another pilot. And they start again that whole process without realizing like you actually have a debrief that you can from the research that you conducted just 5 years ago that you didn't implement any changes on. And so I echo what I understand the sentiment that where you're coming from when it comes to that type of stuff, for
Yeah,
sure.
and I wasn't throwing George Mason under the
Oh
rug
no, I don't mean that at all.
on
Yeah.
that. Yeah, because I mean, they're actually way better than most places that I've, dealt with. We had one university, I won't mention name, which actually hired the lab to, because we specialize in design thinking, to create that process for them. And, hats off to them. This was a couple of years ago. But they said, we don't kill stuff off and we need a process that's, help us create an innovation process that allows us to, basically set up success metrics and
Mhm.
have and part of our lab's function is to green light and sunset, and at the sunsetting, for everything to
Yeah.
green light you have to sunset something.
Almost kill your darlings
Right, exactly.
in a way. So, okay. Um, Now you're working at the scale. We've talked about what you've sort of figured out so far. What are you still like? What's the one thing that you're still trying to figure
Yeah,
out as we speak?
I think there's a big one that plagues everybody in this field, and by this field I mean if you're excited about expanding mobility, economic mobility
Hmm.
for what we call new majority learners, which is basically the majority of the population in the US who for whom college was not originally designed. Um, we have 60% of people who don't have four-year degrees in the US, and we're working to create new types of pathways at the lab. We have one set of pathways called micro pathways where you're actually linked up, like employers get together with the colleges to create basically a stacked group of short courses that might be like 6 months to get right into work. And the employers they're setting the skills requirements, and that's been quite successful. But the problem is that example, but it's happening everywhere, is that we don't have the data
Hmm.
about whether anything besides a degree is, quote, worth it, or,
Interesting.
pays off. And people who are let's call them traditionalists who want everyone to try to get a degree, even though that's not working. Um, they'll sit up on the mountain and, throw stones down at any study that comes out and says micro credentials, which are booming, but they're not. We don't really have the data that says they're working as a
Mm.
sustainable pathway to to financial success. We just don't have the data, and mostly we don't have the data. Our organization's been working on it for years. We mostly don't have the data because it's really hard to keep track of people after they leave school to know whether they're succeeding. And it's easier with degrees and colleges than it is when you're doing, a short form course on cybersecurity, or, you're taking getting a certificate to, be an HVAC person.
Yeah, it's something that I remember seeing. It's like one of those where you go to your 4-year university, you get your degree, maybe you go to grad school, if that. But then if you want to extend your education, there are now so many different pathways that you can learn from. You can go on Udemy, you can go on
Right.
Coursera, you can go on every major university has an online extension now at
Right.
this point where you can get a certification is something. Even major corporations and companies,
Yeah.
Google
True.
has an extension for things like that. And so I understand where it comes from, where it's like, okay, you got the certification in cybersecurity. Did it get you the job that you
Right.
want? And how long did it take you to get the job? Where to that employer were they happy with the credentialing that you got from Google University that,
Right.
okay, you know how to work with, you go to Microsoft and now you know how to work with Azure, or you go to Amazon and you know how to work with AWS, things like that. And so Kathleen, where can folks find you and connect with you and understand the work that you're up to?
That's great. Thank you for asking. So probably the easiest place to follow me right now is on Substack. I do a column that's where I'm tracking a lot of these issues.
Yeah,
And that is it's got the name of my book, which is Who Needs College Anymore? And then I also have a book website, whoneedscollegeanymore.org.
pretty
Those are
simple.
probably
Yeah.
two best places to reach me.
Well, awesome. Kathleen, it's been wonderful to have you here with for our audience. I'm sure a lot of people are trying to understand what is the nature of this education space in the age of AI, especially when you have a lot of different alternative paths for economic mobility. And I will say, I'm always a YouTube fan, and you can learn so many things on the internet nowadays. And so, with that in mind, thank you everyone for joining us today here on Ishmael Interactive. Please check us out on YouTube and as well as ishmaelinteractive.com. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.